All right, first of all, I just want to remind people that tonight's meeting is going to be recorded. So if you don't want your video on the recording, please shut off your video. Also, please go on mute. If you would insert any questions using the chat feature, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, Rabbi, are you going to turn on the recording or somebody?
It's recording.
It is recording? Okay, thank you. All right, so I just want to welcome everyone here tonight. I hope everyone has had a wonderful and enjoyable Passover that we're partway through. Tonight, we're going to have a wonderful program with AIPAC on advancing the U.S.-Israel relationship through science and technology. For a good Arahim, this is now our fourth in a series of meetings on the relationship between Judaism and science. The first, we started out talking about some advanced science concepts and how that impacts religion. Then we talked about the relationship between science and religion. And last week we had a wonderful interview with Roger Price on his book. And we talked more about how to look at Judaism through the lens of science. And that was very interesting. Tonight is our last program, and it's a joint program co-sponsored by congregations Good Arachim and Gates of Heaven. And we're having a program, like I said, with AIPAC, and this should be really very, very interesting. All of the previous programs are available on the Good Arachim website under the Education tab. So if you would like to see those, you can go find them there. Tonight's program will also be added to that list. So Rabbi Spitzer, do you have any words you would like to introduce with tonight's topic?
Yeah, so I just wanted to echo Andy's welcome of everybody. It's wonderful to be doing a joint program with Congregation Gates of Heaven, and I hope that it's a sign that we can have many joint programs in the future. And so welcome to you. And I also want to welcome our friends from AIPAC who are going to talk this evening about the U.S.-Israel relationship and science and technology in Israel. Of course, there are a lot of things going on in Israel right now that are in the news. We read about the election last week. That isn't the topic of our program this evening, though I certainly hope that we have an opportunity to learn together about that as well. I want to thank Andy for putting together this whole series and for having the creativity and stick-to-itiveness and skills of coordinating to make it all come together. It was really, really a pleasure to join with Andy for all of that. Finally, I want to start us off this program with a prayer for understanding, for excitement, for connection, and for hopefully to see the ways in which science and technology can be a vehicle for getting to peace. Not just peace in the region, which of course would be desirable, but also peace in terms of our connection to the state of Israel and to our broader world Jewish community as we think about the American-Israel relationship and the ways in which science and technology help to bring that forward. So I'm really excited about this program, and thank you to everybody for making it happen.
Thank you, Rabbi. So roughly a year ago, I attended the AIPAC policy conference in Washington, D.C. Rabbi Cutler and Spitzer were also there along with other representatives from the Capital District. It was really an outstanding experience, and I would highly recommend other people attending it in the future. The experience of being able to impact U.S. policy toward Israel and meet truly directly with our representatives was something very special. So please look into attending the next APAC policy conference in DC. It's worthwhile. But tonight we have what really should be a wonderful program on advancing the U.S.-Israel relationship through science and technology. And it's being provided to us by APAC. So tonight we have Jacob Scheiner. He's the director of Upstate New York for APAC. Jacob is tasked with the implementation and expansion of pro-Israel development and political activities in the upstate region. Jacob recruits and trains APAC members on how to build effective relationships with their elected officials, regularly communicates APAC's legislative priorities, and educates activists on relevant policy issues. Prior to APAC, Jacob served as campaign manager and congressional aide to Congressman Tom Suozzi of the New York 3rd District. We also
Andy.
have...
Go ahead, sorry.
So welcome. We
Andy.
also... Yes, welcome.
Yes, thank you for the, did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
I wanted to introduce Yael, who's, I believe, our main speaker tonight.
Yes, by all means.
So Yael is APAC's Venture Tech Director based in the Northeast region. In that position, Yael worked with tech leaders in the United States and Israel to showcase how Israeli technology plays an important role in deepening the U.S.-Israel relationship. Yael has organized and led numerous programs focused on different aspects of the Israeli innovation ecosystem, ranging from APAC's National Venture Tech Video Conference calls to Shark Up Nation, hosted both at Policy Conference and New York, featuring early stage startups. Yael received her BA from the George Washington University, majoring in international affairs and minoring in music. So again, please use the chat feature to ask questions and stay muted during the presentation. But now I'm very pleased to turn over the meeting to Jacob Scheiner from APAC. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, Andy, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I really appreciate your leadership in organizing tonight's program. I also want to give a special thanks to Rabbi Spitzer of Agudat Achim and Rabbi Cutler of Gates of Heaven for taking the initiative to host us tonight. I've had the honor of getting to know both of you so well over these past few years, and I really am grateful for your friendship. So thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't add that there's something just a little bit different about Rabbi Spitzer since the last time I saw him, which is that he has a new baby boy named Jonah, who, if I'm correct, is 5 months old now, something like that. So what was that?
Almost 4 months.
Almost 4 months. Mazel tov. So again, on behalf of all my colleagues, I just want to wish you mazel tov to you and to your growing family, and congratulations again. So before we jump into the main program, I'd like to give you just a quick preview of what you'll be seeing tonight.
Challenge. Israel is America's partner for a better future.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing that. So a question that many of you are asking is, why are we here tonight? For many of you, this is your first APAC event. So I think it's appropriate that I begin by telling you about APAC and some of the meaningful work that we've accomplished in the past year. APAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is a bipartisan lobbying organization whose mission is to strengthen and expand the U.S.-Israel relationship in ways that enhance the strength of the United States, as well as the safety and security of Israel. Now, what does that mean? Well, we engage with and educate members of Congress about the inseparable bonds that unite our two countries, and how that it's not only just good for Israel, but that it's also in America's best interest to strengthen this relationship. And so APAC spearheads the efforts to ensure that our friends and family in Israel remain safe and secure. We do this by building relationships with our lawmakers in Washington, D.C., those who have a direct impact on the trajectory of the U.S.-Israel relationship. We engage candidates for Congress early on, educate them, and provide them with the vital resources they need so that when they enter office on day one, they are fully prepared to tackle the complicated issues of Israel and the Middle East. During the pandemic, APAC faced some immense challenges, such as the cancellation of our sister foundation's Hallmark Freshman Member of Congress trip to Israel, which takes place every other August, to the cancellation of our annual policy conference in Washington, D.C., which Andy mentioned earlier. Every year, 18,000 pro-Israel activists attend to show their support. Now, despite these setbacks, I'm proud to say that we've successfully transitioned our lobbying efforts virtually. We've engaged hundreds of candidates for Congress. There are 68 new members of Congress just this year alone. We've lobbied members of Congress over Zoom. For example, just last week, we successfully held 481 Zoom lobbying meetings as APAC activists took to the Capitol Hill virtually. And we've regularly held Zoom programs such as this one tonight all across the country. The pandemic may have sidetracked our efforts, but we are now pushing forward full steam ahead. Now, I can go on and continue about this, and I'm happy to follow up with you individually and have conversations with you about APAC's mission. However, tonight we are here to learn about how America and Israel have partnered together to achieve significant advancements in science and technology. So you will learn about some of the unique companies that have created revolutionary technology that is improving the lives of not just those in Israel and in America, but around the world. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Well, she needs no introduction because she already received an introduction. Yael, thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump right into it. So could you please just tell us, as APAC's Tech Division Director, can you please tell us a little bit about that division and your role there?
Sure. Well, before I start, just wanted to thank everyone for having me. Jake, thanks so much for letting me speak to this incredible community right here about APAC and about the U.S.-Israel tech ecosystem and the role that technology plays in expanding the tech relationship. So the APAC Tech Division is a division, it's a subset division within APAC. And our goal is really to provide a community for people that are in the tech ecosystem. So these could be venture capitalists, they could be private equity professionals, they could be tech CEOs and entrepreneurs, to connect and network, but really focus on highlighting and showcasing the other side of the U.S.-Israel relationship, one that was once traditionally very much focused on military and defense and still is, but also showcasing how is it that Israeli technology is playing such a pivotal role in expanding that relationship. So since APAC's inception, the goal of the organization has been to expand the relationship through military and defense. So every year APAC makes sure that we lobby members of Congress to ensure that Israel receives $3.8 billion of annual aid. But back in 2014, under the Obama administration, we recognized that Israel was such an incredible tech hub. Israel has such a vibrant tech ecosystem. How is it that we can come up with different creative and unique ways to incorporate and interact the Israeli tech ecosystem into the overarching U.S.-Israel relationship? So we introduced the Strategic Partnership Act, which very much did that. It helped bring in cybersecurity innovation and cooperation between Israel and various states in this country. It helped bring in water cooperation and digital healthcare cooperation and medtech cooperation, and even most recently with the rise of this pandemic, different cooperations that come up with how Israel and the United States can work together to solve unique challenges that we're facing now. So our goal with the tech division is very much just highlighting and showcasing the amazing innovations that are coming out of Israel. We're going to feature 3 really cool Israeli tech companies that are really solving unique challenges now as a result of the pandemic. And we'll get into that in a later point of this call. But that's an overarching message as to what we do with the tech division at APAC.
Yeah, Andy had mentioned policy conference, and for those of you who've had the fortune of attending, and for those who I hope get to attend, God willing, next year, one of the coolest showcases and experiences at policy conference is the APAC Tech Showcase, which Yael is, she's very much a part of. So that's one of the things that many look forward to at the policy conference. So just 65 years ago, most of Israel had little to no running water. Fast forward to today, Israel has established itself as a titan of innovation that some consider some call it the startup nation. But as I pointed out, it wasn't always like that. So could you tell us just a little bit about how Israel became a global technology powerhouse that it is today?
Sure. Yeah. So there are 3 components as to why Israel is such a tech powerhouse. I had mentioned this earlier, but there are more startups per capita in Israel than any other country in the world. And that's just an incredible stat. It's a showcase of how Israel is such an innovative hub and has led to the creation of really cool, remarkable startups and companies that have eventually expanded to become massive corporations today. And I would say that there are about 3 components that makes Israel the big tech vibrant hub that it is today. So the first one is the IDF. Does anyone in this room know the book Startup Nation, written by Dan Senor? So this is a remarkable book, and it really just pinpointed and laid out how, I see a few people raising their hands. That's great. It's an incredible book, and it's a book that really sort of laid out some of the foundations as to why Israel is such a tech hub. And a big component of this book really focuses on the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And a key component to that is because the IDF, the military service of excellence, is instilled in every citizen from childhood. Every person who's born in Israel recognizes and understands that they are going to be enlisted and enrolled in the IDF. And at an early age, a lot of these young Israelis are taught leadership skills. They're taught teamwork skills. They're being put in positions of also of being placed in making life and death decisions. And these all translate into being a great leader in general and a great leader in the tech space as well. But also on top of that, there are different sort of subunits within the IDF, like the Shmona Matayim unit, the 8200 unit, which is an elite unit within the IDF that focuses on cybersecurity and innovation that helps Israel have a qualitative military edge. What do I mean by qualitative military edge? That basically is that Israel is a small state in a very dangerous neighborhood. And how is it that Israel is able to protect herself, protect her citizens from impending threats and non-state actors that are attempting to hurt her borders, hurt her people? Israel is attempting to achieve qualitative military edge. And a lot of that comes down to technology, coming up with unique, innovative tech solutions in the defense space to help ensure that her borders are safe. So one of that is the Iron Dome, and we'll get into the Iron Dome in a little bit more detail. But the Iron Dome is a key piece of innovation that has originated from the IDF. A second aspect is the legacy of Ben-Gurion. When he was the first prime minister of Israel, he really stressed the importance of education and of science and technology. And that really did trickle down into the matriculation process for students who eventually not only just enlisted in the IDF, but then eventually went on to get their higher level degrees. And then the third aspect as to why Israel is such a high tech hub is the fact that it is a good test market. And what do I mean by a test market? Israel is a very small country. And as a result, a lot of startups have the ability to create their products, do the research and development in their products, the R&D into their products, and are able to see if the products are actually going to stick. So if you create a company, you want to see if your company is going to have some sort of, if it's going to actually be successful. Israel is a perfect place in terms of its size to see if the product will do well. If the product does well, then the Israelis know, the startup founders know, okay, this is a perfect time for me to actually scale out and expand my product into international markets. So I'll expand my product into the United States and see if that grows. So being a good test market has allowed for a lot of success for a lot of Israeli startups, which have eventually allowed them to grow to these massive corporations where they are today.
Yeah, so you mentioned that Israel sort of has the perfect test market where a lot of tech companies are able to get off the ground there. So I want to hone in on that. Israel has become the Silicon Valley of the Middle East, some say. So how are these companies who, they start off in Israel, eventually they want to expand, how do they typically seek to set up their second offices here in the US? Could you tell us just a little bit about how that comes to be?
Sure. So for Israeli companies to really expand and become successful, innovative companies, yes, a lot of it comes down to the innovation process and the thought process within Israel and within the Israeli borders. But they need to expand. They need to open up and go into different types of markets. So internationally, some companies might want to go to London. They might want to go to other European countries. But typically the market that you want to break into to become a successful startup is the US market. So a lot of startups, a lot of Israeli startups go to New York, they go to Silicon Valley to really set up their second offices or their third offices. Typically, these are sales offices, more sort of public-facing offices to really expand their companies. A few companies actually recently that are Israeli companies have IPO, they've gone public this past year. So one of them being Lemonade, which is a rentals insurance tech company. Another one being Taboola, which is going to be going public within the next year, is an ad company. These are all companies that started off in Israel. They expanded in the United States, and now they're going public on our NASDAQ, on our US stock exchange, which shows that there's a really deep connective tie between Israel and the United States, even through an economic perspective. But I'd also like to take it a step further to talk a little bit more about the politics that come into play with regards to how Israel is setting up shops in the United States. So we spoke a little bit about just the overarching US-Israel relationship that focuses on the federal level between the US, between Congress and Israel, but talking a little bit more about governors, so states and Israel. There are a lot of governors that are establishing partnerships with Israel because they're recognizing that there's a lot of technology that's coming out of Israel that can play a very important role in helping their own respective economies, helping out their own constituents. So you're seeing different governors across different states establishing what we call MOUs, which are memorandums of understandings. And these MOUs are really quite remarkable. You see Governor Cuomo in New York establishing MOUs with Israel, really focusing on a variety of different aspects within the tech ecosystem. So that could be energy focused, cybersecurity focused, fintech focused, which is finance technology focused, healthcare. In Texas, for instance, you're seeing Governor Abbott doing a lot with regards to digital healthcare. So a lot of hospitals in Texas are establishing relationships with Israel. So these MOUs are actually playing a very important role with helping Israeli tech companies expand into the US market. So of course, it's helpful for the Israeli tech companies to grow, but it's also, there is a political aspect to it as well. And we're seeing how US politics plays a very important role in helping Israeli tech companies grow here.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable just how many partnerships exist now between states here, especially in New York, and we'll get to that. We'll talk about just how Israeli technology is playing a role here in our own backyards, but it's not just here in New York, it's all across the country. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, I see we have a few. Looks like Arthur Friedson had a question. Susan had a comment. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and we will address them at the end of the interview. So I'd like to now transition over and highlight some of the companies that are playing a major role in resolving the significant challenges that we face with the COVID pandemic. So the first company that I'd like to highlight is called TytoCare. Tyto Home by TytoCare is a leader in telehealth or virtual medicine with clinicians by providing them with the best home examination and diagnostic solutions. Let's check it out.
Telemedicine is on the rise and holds promise for healthcare organizations, senior care, schools, and employers. But how can you provide diagnosis and treatment without actual physical exam data? Introducing TytoCare, an award-winning FDA-cleared comprehensive medical exam solution that enables clinicians to provide remote diagnoses and prescriptions based on medical-grade exam data of the heart, lungs, throat, ears, abdomen, skin, and temperature. Our full-stack telehealth solution includes a clinician web app to manage the entire telehealth workflow and our patented AI-guided remote examination tools. TytoCare integrates with your existing EHR solution and provides you with your own big data clinical repository for insights and improved diagnosis. Trusted by leading global brands, TytoCare has been proven to boost telehealth utilization, save costs, and easing the burden on providers and preventing exposure to disease. TytoCare, delivering on the promise of telemedicine.
Yael, so what could you tell us about TytoCare?
Sure. So TytoCare is a really cool company. It's headquartered in New York. It's an Israeli company, so founded in Israel, Israeli founders, but headquartered in New York, and has really become a successful tech company, especially during the era of COVID-19. In this past year, actually, it announced raising around $50 million in a round of funding led by some big venture capital funds like Insight Partners, Olive Tree Ventures, Qualcomm Ventures, all very big venture funds. And that's a showcase that the company itself is growing, that there's a lot of remarkable success that this company can bring. So the way that the company works is it's two-folded. So the one way that it works is that it's a device that allows individuals to connect with their doctors or their healthcare practitioners and really, go through their annual checkups on an annual basis. So the company comes with a kit. It comes with a dashboard. It comes with a variety of different types of tools that the patient themselves can utilize in order to interact with the doctor. And the doctor will be virtually, and they'll speak with the patient and they'll walk them through that process. And the reason why this company is so successful is during the era of COVID-19. Especially at the start, people were feeling less and less inclined to go into their doctor's offices, rightfully so, because there's this pandemic that's going on and people were feeling afraid. So this is a way that people are able to interact with their doctors and are able to have those important conversations with their healthcare practitioners and have those daily checkups. On the other hand, the way that Tyto works is it interacts as a software as a service. So doctors will utilize Tyto software to interact with their patients, all in a secure setting. So I know a lot of people end up being a little bit afraid about the rise of technology and how technology might infringe on our personal rights and our personal data. Tyto uses a secure server and is able to be complied with the FDA and different regulatory servers and systems here in the United States in order to ensure that your data is secure. But this company is really revolutionary. I'm going to see this company probably continuing to be successful as we continue to live during this era of remote life. And it allows people to connect with their doctors and their healthcare practitioners in a safe setting.
Yeah, it's pretty neat that all of this was created before the pandemic, and now it's even more relevant than ever. So the next company that we would like to highlight is called Zebra Medical Vision. Let's take a look.
Every year, 1.5 million people die from lung cancer. 3 people break a bone every second due to osteoporosis. These and many other medical conditions can be prevented if discovered early enough using CTs, X-rays, and MRIs. What if you could teach computers to provide faster, more accurate diagnosis based on the combined wisdom and experience of thousands of radiologists? Zebra Medical Vision introduces revolutionary technology based on advanced machine and deep learning. Thousands of previously diagnosed cases are uploaded to our analytics engine, teaching it to create unique algorithms that can identify the visual fingerprints of multiple diseases. Then, when shown a new scan, it instantly recognizes that fingerprint and alerts of the disease. Zebra Medical Vision is giving healthcare a breakthrough tool to help millions of people receive faster, more affordable quality care. Zebra Medical Vision, the future of medical imaging.
Yael, can you tell us a little bit more about this unique technology?
Yeah, it's a pretty cool video. In general, it's very high tech, very sort of meta to a certain extent. Zebra is a really cool platform. It uses medical imaging and machine learning and AI, which is artificial intelligence, to help doctors to really recognize the progression of a disease within the body. So a lot of times you're going to a doctor's office, people go into doctor's offices and they recognize that something doesn't feel right. They don't know where the problem really lies. Zebra uses medical imaging and machine learning to basically figure out where a person's disease really lies within the body. And how does that fall into the era of COVID-19? The way that we've recognized that the way that this disease has been able to progress is that on the one hand, it impacts people pretty drastically. And then on the other hand, it impacts some people less drastically. And Zebra is able to utilize their technology to understand the progression of COVID-19 within the body, within the lungs, and it pretty much gives a level of certainty to the patients themselves and also the doctors. And something that we recognize, especially at the start of this pandemic about a year ago now, which is just incredible to think that it's been a year of this pandemic happening, is that at the start, there were a lot of people being admitted into hospitals, a lot of ventilators being used, a lot of hospital beds taken up, and it really showed that there was a massive strain on our healthcare infrastructure. We did not have simply the resources to take care of the people that needed to be taken care of. So with Zebra, they're able to recognize, using all of these high technological skills, where the progression of the disease falls within the body. And doctors are able to determine if one person is in more need of a ventilator, in more need of a hospital bed, and in more need of more sort of accurate care from a doctor. And this is an incredibly important piece of technology, especially in light of everything that's been happening over the past year. Another thing that I'd also like to note, and we didn't really talk about this, Jake, earlier on, but something that I'd like to note that we talk about quite often with regards to the tech division is how Israeli innovation and technology is breaking down barriers with different countries that might not have traditionally been supportive of Israel in the past. You're seeing that, for instance, with the UAE and Bahrain and Sudan, how Israel is really sort of paving the way forward with technology. And that's the case with regards to India and Zebra Medical Imaging. India actually recently, through their Apollo Medical Group, which is this consortium of hospitals that are based in India, recently utilized Zebra's technology with regards to COVID-19. And that's a really cool showcase of how Israeli technology is deepening ties between Israel and different states and different countries. And Zebra is really at the forefront of doing that, first solving a very big issue that we're facing on our day-to-day lives currently, but then also it's a form of tech diplomacy to a certain extent. It's a form of showcasing how is it that Israeli technology is deepening ties with Israel and different countries that, maybe in 1948 didn't support the right for Israel to exist or become a state, but now are very much strong supporters of Israel. So that's Zebra. It's a really cool company, and happy to answer any questions about that as well.
Yeah, Zebra is quite remarkable. I mean, certainly at the height of the pandemic, when doctors and nurses were making these incredibly difficult life decisions about who to put on a ventilator and who to treat and how to triage patients, something like this. I don't know if it was used, but something like this certainly would have at least what we could presume would have mitigated some of the effect of the pandemic. So really incredible company. So I want to pause for a minute and ask the audience a question. So just by a show of hands, and you can just put your hand up like this, you don't have to take yourself off mute. How many of you like to eat out at restaurants, or at least used to before the pandemic? All right, good. We got a good crowd. I know Rabbi Cutler, big fan of Tara in Schenectady, so we'll have to check that out one of these days. So for those of you that go to restaurants or will be soon or have been, wouldn't it be helpful that every time that you went to go wash your hands at the bathroom at restaurants, the sink actually analyzed how well that you washed your hands? So the last company that we're going to highlight tonight is doing just that. Check it out.
Hands are an essential part of our lives. We use hands to commute, to communicate, to do business, to care, or to prepare food. Even though employees must wash their hands, 1 in every 6 Americans get foodborne diseases as a result of poor hand hygiene practice. This resulting in 42 million illness cases in the US alone. This is why Soapy has developed an IoT-powered hand hygiene microstation that converts hand hygiene into digital data, helping businesses maintain their hygiene quality level. Using face recognition, Soapy provides a use case and user-specific hand hygiene management and practice support, and continuous monitoring of the entire hand sanitizing process. Combined intuitive and visual feedback provide an easy guided experience, while AI-based algorithms make sure that each user washes their hands according to regulatory guidelines and needs. Soapy, saving lives through smart hygiene.
Very cool. So I certainly hope to see that more mainstream in the public one day. So we've highlighted some of the groundbreaking technologies that are coming out of Israel. I'd like to now pivot over to the historic Abraham Peace Accords, the first peace deal of its kind in over 25 years between Israel and some of her Arab neighbors. What are some of the implications that this deal can have in tech collaboration between the countries? And how does technology play a role in advancing the relationship specifically between Israel and the UAE?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this recent peace agreement between Israel and the UAE happened this summer, back in August, and it will really forever change, I believe, the business and tech landscape in the region. We are seeing a lot of interesting and exciting tech cooperations and collaborations between Israel and the UAE, specifically when it comes down to food tech, water supplies, food supply chains, alternative energy sources, the transfer of knowledge when it comes down to even cooperations between Israeli academic institutions in the UAE. And it's a really strong showcase as to the different and exciting collaborative ties that can come about as a result of this new peace agreement. I'd like to actually quote a very interesting quote made by someone named John Medved. He is the founder of Our Crowd, which is a crowdsourcing platform campaign that really sort of helps Israeli startups be connected and invested in by typically American entrepreneurs and venture capitalists that are based here in the United States. But he's been doing actually a lot of really exciting and interesting work between Israel and the UAE for many years, especially even before the peace agreements became fully formalized. So it shows that there has been something happening under the ground, not under the radar, not really something that we were completely aware of, but really has become a little bit more pronounced as things have gone public. So John said is that the UAE and Israel are both incredibly innovative communities in the Middle East. They're both small and they punch way above their weight class in terms of innovation and in terms of venture funding and venture capital. And I think that's a really sort of interesting quote because it showcases the UAE and Israel as first of all, they're two completely different countries based in the Middle East, but very different in terms of democracy and approach and even economic well-being. But what's exciting about it is that they're able to connect and come together when it comes down to technology. So there are different funds that have come out, different collaborative funds that have come out between Israel and the UAE, different tech partnerships between Israeli tech companies that are now being stationed in the UAE. And a lot more will come out of it that I believe we'll see within the coming years as well.
Terrific. I mean, it's so good to see not only just the tech collaboration, but something like more than 50,000 Israelis have traveled to Dubai for vacation since the Abraham Accords, which were last summer. And this is in the middle of a pandemic. More than 50,000 Israelis have traveled to Dubai. So quite remarkable, just the ties between the two countries and the fruits of this peace deal that are already showing so early on. So I want to tie it all back home. We have a variety of U.S.-Israel partnerships in science and tech spheres. And just here in New York, Israeli technology plays a significant role in our everyday lives. So I want to wrap it up by asking you, Yael, what are some of the areas here in the state of New York that has partnered with the state of Israel?
There are so many, and I can go on for hours. This could be a conversation in and of itself that could take up hours of everyone's time, but I'd like to be short. So something that we spoke about a little bit earlier on were these MOUs, these memorandums of understandings that were established between different governors and Israel. So Governor Cuomo established a variety of different MOUs between Israel and the state of New York, but one being focused on a partnership with regards to a power grid that's based in upstate New York. And what's really exciting and cool about this power grid, it's not just any old power grid. It's a power grid that uses the technology that comes from the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome, which was established in Israel, researched and developed in Israel, and plays a very vital role in keeping Israeli civilians safe and secure in light of a variety of different Qassam rockets and rockets coming from non-state actors like Hamas and Hezbollah seeking to destroy Israel. So the Iron Dome, the way that it works is it's able to identify and intercept rockets that are coming into Israel's territories. And another cool thing about the Iron Dome is it's able to determine if a rocket is going to a populated location where people are living, or if it's going to, or a rocket is going to hit a field of crops. So it's able to determine where they're able to appropriately combat those or intercept those rockets that are coming in from these non-state actors. So they're able to utilize that technology that comes from the Iron Dome to our upstate New York power grid. And the way that works is that it's able to determine if there are going to be any potential power outages. So it's able to, this technology is able to determine if we might experience a potential power outage, identify the people that can help resolve those potential power outages, and make sure that we all have the energy to continue to have Zooms like today, to continue to connect with our loved ones remotely, and continue to go about our day-to-day lives. So that's a really cool fact. And that's a direct result of the work that AIPAC is doing. So AIPAC plays a very strong role in ensuring that we cultivate strong relationships with members of Congress. We take those members of Congress to Israel for them to see what it's like on the ground. We introduce members of Congress to even meet, a mother who might have lost her son from a Qassam rocket in Sderot, which is in the south of Israel, before the days of the Iron Dome. And then these members of Congress, they come back to the United States, they understand the daily lives that Israelis have to go through as a result of these acts from terrorists, and the fact that Israel isn't in the safest place in the Middle East. And so as a result, these members of Congress understand the importance of supporting Israel, ensuring that Israel is able to receive an appropriate amount of aid, $3.8 billion of aid that goes to the IDF, but also in addition to that, aid that goes to things like missile defense systems like the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is actually quite costly. Obviously, a lot of time, energy, and money has gone into the building and the establishment of the Iron Dome, but even to operate the Iron Dome, it's incredibly costly. It's about $100 million for a battery. It's about $25K for each rocket that comes out of the Iron Dome. And that's just an incredible stat to think about. It's $25K to make sure that we are able to keep Israel safe and secure. So as a direct result of that, this is all tied into together. It's tied into the work that AIPAC is doing to make sure that Israel has those right resources to be safe and secure, so that Israelis are able to continue about with their day-to-day lives. But then it's tying back in here, even into the United States, making sure that we're able to connect virtually on Zoom, able to make sure that we have electricity, and able to make sure that our power is not, it's not going out. So that's a key tie to everything that AIPAC is doing on a day-to-day basis. And yeah.
Well, Yael, it has been such a pleasure to hear from you tonight. I think I speak for many of us on the call that I've learned so much about some of these incredible innovations coming out of Israel. I know for a fact we have some great questions already from the audience. So I want to start off, it looks like Arthur Friedson asked a question earlier on about how highly subsidized are these startups by the government, and do they get any tax credits to help them out?
Yeah, so the Israeli government plays a very strong role into the growth of the Israeli tech ecosystem. So there's a subset of the Israeli government called the Israeli Innovation Authority. And what they do is they provide a form of venture funding to a certain extent. They don't take any portion of the company. They're not owning the company, but they're providing a certain form of venture assistance to these companies in order to grow. They're essentially like grants. And part of the prerequisites of receiving that money from the Israeli Innovation Authority is to make sure that there are strong ties to Israel, that these Israeli tech companies don't flee immediately and go to the United States or go abroad to Europe. And the reason why they do that is because a lot of these startups play a very strong role in the growth of the Israeli economy. So that's a strong tie to how the Israeli government plays a role in startups.
You mentioned startups. We have a question from Ellen Eisenberg. She says, I read in Startup Nation, the book, that Israeli companies have a different, much less stratified authority structure with much more questioning and personal innovation. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure. I'd say that the Israeli mindset plays a very strong role in the growth and the cultivation of Israeli entrepreneurship and leadership. There is actually someone that we feature quite frequently for AIPAC events in general when we're focusing on the Israeli tech ecosystem, named Inbal Arieli, and she recently wrote a book on chutzpah. And chutzpah plays a very strong role in why Israelis are so why they're so successful in the growth of startups. Yes, the IDF plays a role in that, but the chutzpah, the tenacity that comes out of Israelis plays a very successful role for them to grow their companies, as well as less rigidity in Israel. And as a result, it's definitely allowed for Israeli tech companies to be, or Israeli entrepreneurs to be, a lot more innovative. Another thing that I also didn't mention earlier is the fact that at a young age, within the matriculation process, within the academic institutions, a lot of Israelis are being encouraged to learn computer science and software engineering. And that's something that at a young age here in the United States, we were not really focused, or we weren't forced to do that as much as Israelis have for many, many years. And that also contributed to a lot of the success as to where Israel is today as a startup nation.
Okay, thank you. Gay Griffith from Niskayuna asks if TitleCare is HIPAA compliant. Any comment on that?
I don't want to answer this without fully knowing, I believe it might be. We featured the CEO about a year ago today, and he spoke about TITO. I believe it might be, but I don't want to answer that because I don't know the correct answer completely, but I believe it might be.
Okay. And then we also have a question from Andy as well, is how can we invest and support these other Israeli technology companies?
So there are a variety of different ways that you can invest. There's a company called Our Crowd, which I mentioned earlier today. They're founded by someone named John Medved. And Our Crowd is a cool and unique model that allows individuals to, if you just go on their website, they have a variety of different companies within the Our Crowd portfolio. And they sort of divvy it up between healthcare, maybe social impact, energy. So you can really divide it up based off of maybe what you're interested in. And you yourself as an individual can invest in these companies. So that's very cool. On the other hand, supporting these companies is also supporting AIPAC. At the end of the day, when you're supporting this organization, you're playing a very strong role in ensuring that Israel has those right resources to be safe and secure. And if Israel was not safe and secure, Israel would not have the startup ecosystem where it is today. A big part of where we focus our work as an organization is ensuring that Israel receives that $3.8 billion of annual aid that is going especially to the Israeli, to the IDF. That's about 25% of Israel's overall GDP. And if Israel was going to be spending, not receiving that $3.8 billion, but they would be spending that money, they wouldn't have the resources to invest in the startup culture that's coming out of Israel. So investing and supporting AIPAC's work plays a direct result in supporting Startup Nation. In turn, that also helps elevate Israel's status with regards to diplomacy with other countries. It helps make sure that Israel is able to be safe and secure, just in general, and it helps ensure that the Israeli startups that are able to be successful are able to make an impact across the globe as a whole.
Could not have said it better. Well, it looks like we have no more questions this evening, but I do want to keep in mind that if you do have any additional questions, we could always feel free to reach out to us individually. I'll provide my contact info as well as Yael's for all of you in an email after this. So we're always available if you have any questions or if there's something that comes up after the fact that you want to ask us. So before I turn it over to Rabbi Cutler, I'd like to close just by saying that if you like what you heard here tonight, my only ask of you is that you please keep in touch with us, learn more about AIPAC, and get involved. We need as many people in this room as possible to show their support for a strong America and a safe and secure Israel. Because if you don't do it, then who will? What does it mean to be involved in AIPAC? Well, it entails learning about the issues, building a relationship with and educating your member of Congress. That could mean engaging your pro-Israel friends and neighbors by hosting a parlor meeting of your own. It could mean taking part in our grassroots initiatives to mobilize on pro-Israel legislation, or even involve joining AIPAC as a club member, which some of you in this room already have done. Your engagement and your activism in the pro-Israel cause lends a voice to critical pieces of legislation that affect not just the US-Israel relationship, but the New York-Israel relationship, as you've heard tonight. The choice is yours. I just want to briefly introduce our upstate New York fellow, Miranda Weiss. Miranda, if you don't mind just raising your hand, who's with us tonight. She and I will be following up with each of you individually in the next coming weeks. My hope that tonight's program will be a catalyst for your involvement in the pro-Israel movement here in the Capital Region. And so you could have been doing anything else tonight. You could have been watching one of the opening day baseball games. I was hoping to watch the Mets tonight against the Nats, but that game got canceled. But you're here with us tonight. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. I want to wish a very happy, meaningful Passover to all of you. I'd like to now turn it over to Rabbi Matt Cutler of Congregation Gates of Heaven for some wise words before we sign off this evening. Thanks so much.
Wow, wise words, Jake. Wise. Wow, you put no pressure on me. Look, I have to say, first of all, thank you to Andy Gavins for pulling this together, who have the vision of really what us to really talk about having a relationship with Israel through its science and technology. This is an important part of it. And one of the things, the gifts that AIPAC gives us is the opportunity to reclaim the narrative on how we talk about Israel, not only in terms of the news of events, but rather the vision that Israel brings to the table in terms of science, technology, economy, integration of population. There are many incredible things that Israel is bringing to the world that we as Americans need to shout about and be proud about in our relationship. Yes, of course, the annual, when we used to be able to make things annually, gathering in Washington, D.C. was a big part of it. The lobbying effort is a big part of it, but also cultivating the personal relationships where people can say, come, let me share with you the joys and the beauty of what Israel brings. Look, Israel's a part of us. We all know that. It's a part of our neshama. It's part of our religious identity. Unlike any other people in the world, we are emotionally, spiritually bound to a geographic spot, whether we're citizens or not. We are Chovavei Tzion. We are lovers of Israel. And being able to share that with others is important. What AIPAC brings is a forum in which we can address complex, different ideas, really argue among ourselves and learn to listen from each other. It lets us have the opportunity to realize the rich blessings that are involved in some great challenges in the land of Israel. And our support is essential. I do want to single out the work of the AIPAC staff. Yael, phenomenal presentation tonight. Thank you so very much. But I know, Jake, your bosses are here, so I need to single out you for the work that you do in cultivating the relationships one by one, whether it's encouraging me to participate in the annual convention or encouraging me to go on the rabbi's trip to see Israel in a very different light. What the AIPAC staff does is the gift of friendship. They take us by the hand and help us understand a new way of learning about Israel and applying our fundamental love for Israel. So I know I speak for my friend, Rabbi Spitzer, when we say thank you to the AIPAC staff, and we say thank you to all of them for making time tonight, as well as Andy Gavin for putting this all together. May the rest of Pesach be a beautiful one. Hag Sameach to all of you, and Kol Tov.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Cutler. Wonderful views on AIPAC and the program. I absolutely agree with you. So AIPAC, Jacob, Riael, thank you so much for a really very informative and impressive, just small taste of the technologies being developed in Israel. It was really just wonderful. Very nice presentations. I also want to thank Congregation Gates of Heaven for co-sponsoring this with Congregation Agudat Achim. It was very nice to do this jointly for Schenectady. And obviously there's a lot of technology development occurring in Schenectady. So this is very, very beneficial. I would also like to thank the Adult Ed Committee at Agudat Achim, co-chaired by Gary Reich and Rob Fox, as well as the support provided by Rabbi Spitzer, Jack Mintzer, Josh Cooper Ginsburg, and also Arnie Rottenberg from Congregation Gates of Heaven. Finally, I just want to remind everyone that, again, the past meetings from this Judaism and Science series are available on the Agudat Achim website, as well as tonight's presentation meeting also will be placed there too. And finally, again, thank you, AIPAC. This was just a wonderful, wonderful evening. I hope that we can continue to do additional programs with you. What the work that you do is very important to America and to the Israeli economy. So thank you very much. And with that, everyone have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful Passover and Hag Sameach, Laila Tov.